Sometimes, survival isn't about running faster. It's about standing still and facing what hunts you. After months of fragile peace, Ethan, Mara, and their children built more than a home on the Texas plains. They built trust, a family. But nature has a way of warning those who listen. The dying crops, the broken sensors, the voice only a hybrid child could hear. It was not just coincidence, it was a signal. A new threat was rising. And this time, running would not save them. The morning air over the Texas plains was unusually still. It was the kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of Ethan Grayson's neck stand up. Not because of the silence itself, but because of what wasn't there. The usual rustle of the prairie grass, the distant calls of birds greeting the dawn, even the gentle hum of insects, all gone. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Ethan stood on the porch of his farmhouse, the wood beneath his boots, creaking softly. The sun had barely risen, casting long, cold shadows across the fields. Mara was already at the edge of the garden, crouched low, inspecting the plants. Her dark hair caught the faint light as she brushed a hand gently over a row of corn stalks. "They're dying," she said quietly, her voice heavy with confusion. "But the weather's been perfect." Ethan walked over, his brow furrowed. The soil was moist. The air was crisp but not cold enough for frost. Yet the plants, strong and vibrant just yesterday, now stood wilted, their leaves curled and blackened at the edges. The damage wasn't random. It ran in a clean line across the garden, as though something invisible had swept through in the night. "I've seen blight before," Ethan muttered, "but not like this." "Not overnight." Mara didn't answer. She was staring at the horizon, her violet eyes distant, troubled. Behind them, the farmhouse door creaked open, and the two children stepped out. The boy, still half asleep, rubbed his eyes. The girl, older, quiet, and always watchful, paused at the top step. Her name was Lyra. Though she rarely spoke unless prompted, today there was an urgency in her gaze. She clutched the old wool blanket around her shoulders, but seemed unaffected by the morning chill. "Mom," she whispered, her voice almost carried away by the faint breeze. "I heard it again." Mara turned sharply. "Heard what?" Lyra's eyes locked onto her mother's, then shifted to Ethan. "The calling." "In the wind." Ethan frowned. "The wind?" Lyra nodded, stepping carefully down the stairs toward the garden. "Last night. And just now, it's like a song, but not with words. It's not loud, it's far away." She hesitated, as if searching for the right explanation. "It's not meant for everyone to hear." Ethan and Mara exchanged a glance. They hadn't told the children much about the past, about the blood that ran in their veins, half human and half something more. But the truth was inescapable. The girl was hearing something beyond their understanding. The wind stirred again, brushing past them with a cold breath that smelled faintly of sage and earth. And something else, something metallic, like the scent after a summer lightning strike. "I thought it was a dream at first," Lyra continued. "But it's real. It calls to me, like it's trying to tell us something." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He glanced back at the farmhouse. On the porch, the old radio, usually silent, crackled to life. A burst of static popped, then faded. Moments later, the motion sensor light above the barn flickered, even though there was nothing moving. "That's not just coincidence," Ethan said, his voice low. "Something's off." He checked the power lines running to the barn. No damage, no shorts. The generators were steady. The equipment had been reliable for years. But now the sensors, the radio, even the old tractor's dashboard lights, they were all behaving like something unseen was interfering. Mara stood up from the garden, wiping dirt from her palms. Her eyes narrowed as she looked across the fields, beyond the distant fence line. "We felt safe here for too long," she whispered. Maybe they found us." Ethan shook his head, though the doubt was already gnawing at him. "We've kept a low profile. No signals, no contact with anyone." "But they don't need signals," Mara replied. "If the children can hear the calling, others can too." Ethan knew she wasn't talking about people. Not just people. Whatever government or private groups still hunting Mara's kind would have technology, sensors, ways to detect things beyond human senses. But the calling, that was something else. Something older. Something natural but far from benign. Lyra moved closer to her mother, slipping her small hand into Mira's. "It doesn't feel dangerous," she said softly. "It feels sad, like someone's looking for us." Ethan knelt to the girl's level. "You're sure it's not just noise? Not the wind or animals?" She shook her head. "No, Papa. It's like a voice, but not with words. It's speaking without speaking." The use of the word Papa struck Ethan in a way he wasn't ready for. She had called him that only a handful of times before, always in moments of fear or uncertainty. The title was more than a name, it was a bond, a plea for trust and protection. Ethan stood and turned his gaze toward the horizon. The plains stretched wide and empty, golden in the morning light. But now the emptiness felt different. It felt watched. "Keep the kids inside today," he told Mara. "No working the fields. Stay close to the house." Mara nodded, though worry creased her brow. "What will you do?" "Walk the perimeter. Check for signs." But even as he said it, Ethan knew that whatever was happening wasn't something he could track with boot prints or broken fences. This was deeper. It was a warning, whether from nature itself or from something far beyond it, he couldn't yet tell. As Mira led the children back inside, Ethan remained where he stood, scanning the skies, the land, even the very air. The morning wind whispered again. It no longer felt like just a breeze. It felt like a message. And for the first time since they had built this fragile peace, Ethan feared that the quiet life they had carved out together was beginning to unravel. Whatever was coming, they were not ready. Not yet. By late afternoon, the wind had died down, but the uneasy feeling it carried lingered. Ethan finished his circuit around the property. No broken fences. No tire tracks. No obvious signs that anyone or anything had crossed into their land. Yet the plants were still withering, the sensors still flickering without reason, and Lyra's words haunted his thoughts. He returned to the house, where Mara and the children were gathered in the kitchen. The boy was drawing shapes on the dusty table, while Lyra sat quietly, her wide violet eyes fixed on the window. She had barely spoken since the morning, as if concentrating on that silent voice she alone could hear. Mara glanced at Ethan, worry etched deep in her face. "Anything?" "Nothing I can see," he replied. "But it doesn't mean no one's out there." As if summoned by his words, the outer motion sensor chimed softly, a dull electronic ping that shouldn't have sounded at all. Ethan's hand went to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. Someone, or something, was at the gate. "Stay inside," he told Mara quickly. "Lock the back door. If you hear anything, take the kids to the basement." Mira's breath hitched, but she nodded. She had learned not to argue in moments like this. Trust was built in their shared silence. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed against the setting sun. At the edge of the long dirt road, a figure stood. A lone man, no vehicle in sight. He wore a dusty gray coat, boots scuffed from long travel, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. He made no move toward the house. He simply stood there as if waiting for permission to approach. Ethan's military instincts kicked in. Everything about this stranger was wrong. Nobody walked this far into private land without a reason, and certainly not without wheels. Yet the man's posture wasn't aggressive. His hands were empty, open. "I don't want trouble," the man called out, his voice carrying clear over the distance. Ethan didn't lower the rifle. "Too late. You already found some." "I'm not with the cleaners." That made Ethan's pulse spike. The man knew the word. Cleaners, the shadow group that had hunted Mara's kind across the continent. Few even knew the name, and those who did were either predators or prey. The man slowly lifted his chin. "My name's Gale. I'm not here to harm your family." Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. "You know who's in that house?" "I know who you've been sheltering." Gale took a careful step forward, stopping just shy of the second fence. "Mara. And the children. I've been searching for weeks, not to hurt them, to warn them." "Warn them about what?" "The cleaners are coming." And not just a scouting party this time. Ethan felt the air around him grow heavier. "You're a little late. We handled the last ones." Gale nodded slowly. "I heard. Word's gotten out, which is why you're running out of time." "The cleaners aren't sending small teams anymore. They've consolidated under a new command, a coalition." "What kind of coalition?" "The worst kind. Government defectors, corporate contractors, private militias. And worse, people like me." Ethan didn't miss the choice of words. Like me. "So you're one of them." "Was." Gale's jaw tightened. "I walked away when I realized what they were doing, what they'd done to her people. I've been trying to make it right ever since." Ethan's mind raced. It could be a trap, a clever one, lure them out. Lower their defenses. But something about Gale's stance, the weariness in his eyes, it didn't read as a hunter. It read as a man who'd seen too much. A man carrying too many regrets. "I've brought information," Gale continued, reaching slowly into his coat. Ethan aimed the rifle higher. "Easy. Just paper." He pulled out a folded map and a small, battered notebook. He held them up like a peace offering. "Coordinates, cleaner movement patterns, locations they're avoiding. It's not much, but it might buy you time." Ethan didn't move. Behind him, he heard the soft creak of the door. Mira had stepped out onto the porch, the children hidden behind her skirts. Her face was pale, her violet eyes locked onto Gale's. "Gale," she breathed. "From Sector 3? Gale nodded. "I kept my promise, Mira. I said if I ever found survivors, I'd help." For a moment, Ethan saw something pass between them. Not trust. Not yet, but recognition, shared history. The kind forged in the worst of circumstances. "I thought you were dead," Mira whispered. "So did a lot of people." Ethan lowered the rifle, but only slightly. "If what you say is true, why risk coming here? They could be tracking you." "They are tracking me. I'm the bait." "But I led them the wrong way. Bought myself a day, maybe two." The sky had darkened while they spoke. In the distance, thunder rolled. Not from the clouds, but the low, mechanical hum of vehicles crawling across the horizon. Gale's eyes hardened. "I'll help you prepare." "But we can't stay still for long." Ethan felt Mira's hand slip into his, trembling. Her children clung tighter behind her. For the first time, Ethan understood what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about surviving a storm far larger than he had ever imagined. And it had already begun. Night had fallen fully now, cloaking the Texas plains in deep shadow. The only light in the farmhouse came from a single oil lamp on the kitchen table, its glow casting long, soft beams across the worn wooden floor. Outside, the distant hum of unseen engines had faded, for now. But the unease remained, like the scent of rain just before a storm. Gale sat at the table, his hands folded in front of him. Mara stood behind her children, protective, but no longer ready to bolt. Ethan remained by the door, rifle still within arm's reach. His instincts screamed at him to stay cautious. But the moment had come. The questions that had simmered in his mind for weeks, months, could no longer be avoided. "Tell me everything," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but firm. "Who exactly are they hunting? And why do they want your children so badly?" Mara's eyes closed briefly, as if steeling herself. Then she motioned for the children to go to the back room. Lyra hesitated, her hand still gripping her mother's, but Mara gave her a gentle nod. "Just for a little while," she whispered. Once the door closed softly behind them, Mara turned to face Ethan and Gale. Her violet eyes glimmered in the lamplight. She seemed so fragile standing there, but Ethan knew the truth. She was stronger than she looked. She always had been. "I should have told you sooner," she began, her voice low. "But fear kept stopping me. Not fear of you, Ethan. Fear of what the truth would bring." She glanced at Gale, who gave a solemn nod. "My people. We never meant to come to this planet. We weren't explorers. We were refugees. Our world was dying, a plague that corrupted both body and mind. Some of us escaped in the final days. A small colony ship, barely functional. We didn't know where we'd end up. We just ran." Ethan listened in silence, his mind turning over every word. It wasn't the first time he'd heard fragments of Mara's past, but this was the first time it came without hesitation, without secrets. "We crash-landed in a desert far to the south," Mara continued. "At first, the local people thought we were some kind of government experiment or weapons test gone wrong. But once they realized we weren't hostile, some tried to help." She looked at Gale again. He was one of them. Gale leaned forward. "I was young then. Just a field researcher for a small private aerospace contractor. We weren't military. We wanted to understand who they were, how they'd survived such a journey. But others, powerful people, saw an opportunity." Mara's hands clenched at her sides. The experiment started quietly. "They told us they were studying how our biology adapted to Earth's environment. But soon they moved beyond observation. They began manipulating genes, mixing human DNA with ours." Her breath caught. "I was one of the first. They took women from my people, altered our DNA with traits they considered desirable. Intelligence, resilience, adaptability. They were creating hybrids." Ethan's heart sank. He had suspected some of this, but hearing it aloud turned his stomach. "And the children. They're the last," Mara whispered. "The final generation. When the cleaners turned on us, when they decided our existence was too dangerous, most of our people were wiped out. Those who carried hybrid genes were targeted first." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "I ran. I took my children and fled. They are not just my family, Ethan. They are living proof that two species, two worlds, can become one. That cooperation is possible. But to the cleaners, they're a threat." A secret that could upend decades of lies and fear-mongering. Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He understood now why the cleaners were relentless. If the public ever discovered the truth, governments and corporations alike would be exposed. The experiments, the betrayals, the murders. It wasn't just about silencing Mara and her children. It was about erasing the evidence of humanity's greatest crime and its greatest possibility. Gale's voice was quiet, but firm. I stayed behind after most of my team disappeared. I collected data, recorded everything I could, smuggled families to safety when possible, but there were so few survivors. And eventually, I went dark. Until I found traces of Mara's flight. Mara stepped closer to Ethan, her expression raw and open. I kept the children's nature hidden, even from you. I didn't want to burden you or put you at greater risk. Ethan shook his head slowly. You should have told me. I was afraid you'd send us away. He met her gaze steadily. That was never going to happen. The weight of the moment pressed down on all three of them. The silence stretched, heavy and meaningful. Finally, Gale unfolded the small notebook he had brought. Inside were pages filled with coded entries, coordinates, names. This is what I've gathered. Locations where hybrids might still be hiding. Safe zones. Underground networks. There's a chance we're not alone. Ethan nodded, though the idea filled him with both hope and dread. More people meant more help, but also more targets. Mara touched his arm gently. Now you understand why running isn't just survival. It's preservation. Ethan reached up, covering her hand with his. Then we'll stop running. If we can't hide forever, we fight. For you. For them. For what's right. Gale looked between them. It won't be easy. The cleaners have resources beyond what I've seen before. Technology that can track genetic markers across miles. Ethan's eyes hardened. Let them come. Outside, the wind picked up again, cool and sharp. But this time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like the beginning of a reckoning. The wind outside had settled into a quiet murmur by the time Ethan finished reviewing Gale's notebook. The pages were brittle at the corners, smudged by years of rough hands and hurried writing. But the message was clear. The cleaners were expanding their reach, moving in coordinated patterns across the region. Safe zones were vanishing. Friends were going silent. The room had grown colder despite the lamp's glow. Ethan finally closed the notebook and leaned back against the chair. Mara stood near the stove, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her shoulders were tense, eyes shadowed with worry. Gale sat across from Ethan, his expression heavy. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mara broke the silence. We should leave tonight. Ethan's brow furrowed. Leave? After everything we've built here? You don't understand, Mara whispered, voice shaking. This place was never meant to be permanent. It was shelter, temporary. Now it's a trap. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. You think running will save us? We've been through this before. We run, they follow. We fight, they fall back. If we keep retreating, eventually there will be no ground left. Mara shook her head. If we stay, they won't just come for me. Or the children. They'll come for you too. Ethan stood slowly, trying to keep his temper in check. I made peace with that risk the night I let you into my home. We fight to protect what's ours now. I won't uproot the children again. The floor creaked softly behind them. Lyra had opened the door to the back room, her small frame silhouetted in the faint lamplight. She said nothing, but her wide, serious eyes watched every word. Mara followed Ethan's gaze and swallowed hard. You don't know what they're capable of. They won't stop. They won't negotiate. If they corner us here, they'll burn everything down to cover their tracks. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. And where would we go? Where's safer than this? Another forest? Another abandoned farm? We'll never find peace if we keep running. Mara's hands clenched into fists. It's not about peace. It's about survival. Gale cleared his throat softly, trying to ease the growing tension. There are contacts further west. I've heard rumors of a settlement, people sympathetic to Mara's kind. If we can reach them— No, Ethan cut in. His voice was low but firm. No more rumors. No more maybes. We can't uproot the children every time fear knocks at the door. His gaze softened as he looked toward Lyra. They finally started to feel safe. To live like children again. We can't take that away. Lyra stepped closer, clutching the edge of the table. If we keep running, will there ever be a place where we can stay? The simple question struck Ethan harder than any argument Mara or Gale could have made. He glanced at Mara, expecting her to respond. But she was silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. The boy, Milo, emerged from the back room behind his sister, his small hand gripping her sleeve. His eyes were sleepy but full of confusion. Are we leaving again, Mama? Mara knelt beside them, brushing Milo's hair back gently. Not yet. But her face betrayed her doubt. She was ready to run, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile roots they had laid down here, even if it meant breaking what little peace the children had found. Ethan felt the weight of their choices settling like a stone in his gut. Running might keep us breathing, but it won't give them a future. Standing our ground, that might. Mara's eyes glistened. And if it gets you killed, then at least they'll know someone fought for them. For once. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Gale seemed uncertain now, his earlier confidence fading beneath the enormity of the decision. Finally, Mara stood and gathered the children in her arms. We'll talk more tomorrow, she said quietly. The children need rest. She guided them back to their room, her movements stiff, shoulders tight with tension. As the door closed behind them, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Gale, who was watching him with a mixture of sympathy and caution. You think I'm wrong? Ethan asked. Gale hesitated. I think there are no right answers anymore, only choices. Hard ones. Ethan nodded slowly. Then I choose to stay, to fight. Gale leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you do, you'll need more than courage and a rifle. You'll need allies. We'll find them. Ethan stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the moon had risen high, casting silver light across the fields. The dying crops swayed gently in the breeze, their decay a quiet reminder of how quickly stability could unravel. Behind him, the door to the children's room creaked open again. Lyra's voice drifted into the kitchen. Papa! Ethan turned. She stood alone in the doorway, her violet eyes shimmering in the dim light. If we stay and fight, will you teach me how? Her words froze him in place. For a long moment he could only stare. Then he smiled, though the sadness in it ran deep. Yes, he said softly. I will. In that moment, the fracture between fear and hope narrowed. Just a little. Enough. The next morning, the decision was no longer up for debate. The family would stay, and they would fight. Ethan rose before dawn, long before the first streaks of light touched the plains. The cold bit at his skin as he stepped out into the early gray. The fields stretched silently in all directions, an ocean of brittle grass and dry soil. His home, their home, He wouldn't let it fall without a fight. Inside the house, Mara was already awake. She stood by the kitchen window, her arms crossed, watching him. Her face was pale but set with determination. For once there was no argument in her eyes, no fear, only a quiet, shared purpose. Gale entered behind her, carrying a roll of old blueprints and maps. "We don't have much time," he said. "Based on the patrol patterns I tracked, we have maybe 2 days before they reach us." "Then we use every hour," Ethan replied. They gathered around the kitchen table. Gale unrolled the blueprints, smoothing them flat. The drawings showed the house, barn, fields, and the network of fencing that enclosed their small slice of the world. It wasn't much, but it was defensible, with the right strategy. Ethan pointed to the northern fence line. "They'll come from here. It's the most accessible approach. Trees for cover, high ground beyond. We can set traps," Gale added. "Snare wires, pressure plates. I have a few old tricks from my field days." Ethan nodded. "We'll also reinforce the barn. If the house is compromised, it'll serve as fallback." Mira studied the map, her brow furrowed. "And what about the children?" "We'll make a safe room in the cellar," Ethan said. "They stay there until it's over." Mara hesitated, then nodded. "I'll help reinforce the door." For the next few hours, the house became a hive of activity. Ethan and Gale began rigging simple traps along the northern fence. Tripwires connected to noisemakers, loose boards hiding nails. Gale even modified some old farm equipment into crude but deadly defenses. Ethan repurposed metal sheets from the shed to strengthen the barn doors. It wasn't high-tech, but it would buy them precious minutes when the time came. Mara didn't stand aside. She worked beside them, hammering boards, hauling supplies. Her hands, once delicate, now bore the marks of a survivor, scratches, bruises, and the dirt of someone determined to protect her family. By midday, even the children were pitching in. Lyra insisted on helping fortify the cellar. Under Ethan's careful supervision, she carried tools, learned how to secure the door from the inside, and memorized the emergency signals they had agreed upon. Milo, too young to understand the full gravity of what was coming, followed his sister's lead. He gathered supplies, blankets, water, a small crate of food, and stacked them carefully in the cellar corner. It was a quiet act of bravery that made Ethan's throat tighten. As the sun arced across the sky, Gale returned from a supply run to the edge of the property. He carried a dusty, long-forgotten crate. Inside lay several old but functional weapons, shotguns, hunting rifles, and a small cache of ammunition. "I stashed these years ago. Thought I might never need them again." Gale's expression was grim. "Looks like I was wrong." Ethan distributed the weapons carefully, one for himself, one for Gale. Mira took a lightweight pistol after a brief hesitation. She had never fired a gun before, but there was resolve in her eyes now. She would do whatever it took. As the final preparations stretched into evening, the family gathered in the kitchen once more. The maps were rolled away. The weapons were ready. The traps were set. There was nothing left to do but wait. Ethan stood at the window, looking out over the darkening fields. The land he had once tended alone now felt alive with purpose. Not because of the defenses, not because of the weapons, but because of the people he was protecting. Mara joined him, her hand brushing against his. "They're scared," she said softly, nodding toward the children. "But they're trying to be strong." "They won't have to fight," Ethan replied. "That's our job." She turned toward him, eyes shimmering. "I was wrong before about running, about leaving. This, what we have, it's worth fighting for." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "We'll keep them safe." In the corner of the room, Lyra watched silently. She clutched the small locket Mira had given her, the one containing a piece of their people's history. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the low light. "When they come," Lyra said softly, "I'll hear them, before you see them." Ethan nodded. "Then you'll be our early warning." The family ate a quiet meal together. Bread, cheese, and preserved meat. Nothing fancy, but it was a meal shared in unity. A final moment of calm before the storm. As darkness fell completely over the plains, Ethan felt the weight of the coming battle settle across his shoulders. They had done all they could. Now, it was only a matter of time. The night stretched out before them, heavy with silence. But unlike before, it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of readiness. The night was dense, the kind of blackness that swallowed the horizon and blurred the line between earth and sky. A cold breeze stirred the dying crops, whispering against the fence lines. Ethan crouched by the barn's southern wall, rifle steady in his hands. His breath was slow, controlled. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready. Inside the house, Mara sat by the cellar door. The children were already hidden below, the emergency lantern casting a pale glow over their faces. Gale moved like a shadow from window to window, watching the fields. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, Lyra's voice, soft but urgent, filtered through the basement vent. "They're here." Ethan's heart thudded once, hard. He scanned the darkness. At first, the fields looked empty. Just the usual sweep of moonlight across brittle grass and rusted wire, but then the shapes emerged. Figures. 6, no, 8, moving low and fast, fanning out along the northern fence. Their dark suits absorbed the moonlight, masks covering their faces. No insignias, no flags. Just shadows with weapons. The cleaners, Gale whispered over the small radio they'd set up. North fence breached. Pressure plates not triggered. They must have scanned for traps. Ethan cursed under his breath. They've adapted. Of course they had. The cleaners weren't amateurs. They had resources, intelligence. They learned. But so had Ethan. As the intruders moved past the first line of defense, one man tripped a wire disguised beneath loose earth. A sharp snap cracked the silence as a nailboard swung up from the ground, catching him squarely in the shin. He dropped with a strangled cry. Chaos erupted. Ethan fired the first shot. The rifle's blast tore through the night, striking one of the masked figures square in the chest. The man staggered, then crumpled. The others responded instantly. 2 cleaners rushed the barn, weapons raised. Gale opened fire from the house. His shotgun roared, spraying buckshot into the attackers. One fell back, clutching his side. Mira held her position by the cellar. The pistol trembled in her hands, but her jaw was set. She wasn't running this time. The cleaners pressed forward. They moved in teams, covering one another with military precision. Ethan knew this kind of maneuvering. He'd used it himself in another life. But this was his land now, his family. He fired again. Another cleaner dropped. One of the remaining intruders veered toward the house, a compact device in hand, a pulse generator. Designed to disable electronics, it could fry their lights, their radios, even their sensors. "Gale!" Ethan shouted. Gale didn't hesitate. He leaned out the window and squeezed the trigger. The device exploded in the cleaner's hand, a burst of blue-white light flashing across the yard. For a moment, the attackers hesitated. Just long enough. From the cellar vent, Lyra's voice came again. Calm. Focused. 2 more, east side. Ethan pivoted. He spotted them circling wide, trying to flank the barn. They were fast, but not faster than a man defending his home. He met them head-on, rifle raised. The first shot caught one in the shoulder. The second struck the other in the thigh. Both men went down hard, disappearing into the tall grass. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from the house. Milo. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Without thinking, he sprinted back toward the kitchen door. As he burst inside, he saw Mira standing at the cellar entrance, pistol raised, her body shielding the children. A cleaner had made it through. He loomed in the doorway, a blade glinting in his hand. "Step aside," the intruder hissed. "I only need the hybrids." Mira's hand didn't waver. "You'll have to go through me." Before the man could react, Ethan fired. The rifle's blast echoed like thunder. The cleaner collapsed. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing, the children's soft sobs, and Mira's steady, unyielding stance. Then, from outside, Gail's voice cracked over the radio. "They're retreating." Ethan moved to the window. Sure enough, the surviving cleaners were falling back, dragging their wounded with them. "They'll regroup," Gail warned. "This was just the first wave." Ethan nodded grimly. He turned to Mira, who was gathering the children close, whispering reassurances, even as her hands shook. "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "I told you they wouldn't get this far." "I was wrong." Mira looked up. Her violet eyes burned, not with fear but with something fiercer. "You weren't wrong. We held them off, and we will again." In that moment, despite the carnage, despite the danger still looming, Ethan felt a surge of pride. They had stood their ground. They had fought together, and they weren't done yet. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the broken grass and whispering through the trees. It didn't feel like a warning this time. It felt like defiance. The night had quieted once more, but it was not the peace of victory. It was the hush that follows a storm, heavy and uncertain. Ethan stood in the yard, rifle still warm in his hands. Smoke curled up from a small fire burning where one of the traps had caught an intruder's gear. The scent of scorched earth filled the air, but they all knew this wasn't over. "They'll regroup," Gail said, stepping beside him. His face was lined with exhaustion. Blood stained his coat from a grazing shot, though he waved it off. "We hurt them, but they won't back down. Not until they have what they came for." Ethan nodded grimly. "How long do you think we have?" "An hour. 2, if we're lucky." Inside the house, Mara was tending to the children. Milo clung to her side, too shaken to speak. Lyra, however, remained alert. Her hearing, the gift of her bloodline, kept warning her that more were coming. But there was something else in her expression now. Not fear. Resolve. Ethan glanced toward the barn where Gail had set up the last line of defenses. They had used almost everything they had. Ammo, traps, even the old generator to power makeshift floodlights. They were running out of options. And Gail knew it. "Listen," Gail said quietly. "There's a way to buy you more time." Ethan frowned. "What are you thinking?" "I've still got that transmitter from my days with the cleaners. It's coded. Secure. If I activate it on the North Ridge, they'll think you've moved camp. They'll divert, hunt where I lead them." "That's suicide," Ethan growled. "It's a soldier's choice," Gail replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I've run from this for too long. Helping smuggle survivors, hiding, always looking over my shoulder. I can't run anymore. Not when I can finally do something that counts." Ethan grabbed Gail's arm. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way." Gail's eyes hardened. "Your family has a chance, a real chance. But not if they stay pinned down here. If I draw the cleaners out, you can get them to the next safe zone, the one on the old map. Sector 4. Mara had stepped out onto the porch, listening. She shook her head fiercely. No. We stay together. Gale offered a sad smile. That's what families say. But sometimes, staying together means making sure someone survives. Even if not everyone can. For a long moment, no one spoke. The truth hung between them, bitter and undeniable. I owe you this, Gale added. I owe all of you. And I owe them. He nodded toward the children. A future. Mara's lips trembled. You saved us once before. Don't ask us to let you go now. I'm not asking, Gale replied softly. I'm telling you, it's the only way. Before Ethan could stop him, Gale pulled free and moved toward the barn. His silhouette vanished into the shadows. The transmitter, Ethan realized, must have already been prepared. Gale had known this might come. He had planned for it. Gale! Ethan called out, but the older man didn't turn back. Moments later, from the northern ridge, a bright flare shot into the sky, an old military signal, burning orange against the black. The cleaners would see it. They would follow. It was working. Mara sank to her knees, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a sob. Ethan moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her and the children. Lyra looked up, tears shining in her violet eyes. He's giving us a head start. Yes, Ethan whispered hoarsely, but we have to make it count. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Ethan gathered the children's supplies. Mara packed what little food they had left. The emergency map, the one Gale had marked, was folded carefully into Ethan's jacket. From the ridge, the sound of engines roared as the cleaners diverted, chasing the false signal. But just as they were readying to leave, a sharp crack echoed across the plains. A gunshot. Mara froze. Gale? Another shot rang out. Then two more. Ethan clenched his jaw. He's drawing them in, giving us time. They couldn't wait. Not now. Not when Gale's sacrifice was still unfolding. Ethan led them through the back fence, the children moving quickly but quietly. Mara held Milo close, while Lyra followed at Ethan's side, eyes scanning the darkness. As they reached the edge of the property, a final burst of gunfire rattled across the night. Then, silence. Cold. Complete. Final. Mara's shoulders shook, but she kept walking. They didn't look back. The north ridge stood bathed in faint moonlight. In the distance, where Gale had lit the signal flare, smoke curled upward like a silent farewell. He had made his choice, and because of him, they had a future. As they moved west, toward the uncertain promise of Sector 4, Ethan felt the weight of Gale's sacrifice pressing against his heart. It was not the first time he had lost a comrade, but it was the first time the loss carried the hope of something greater. Beside him, Mara wiped her eyes, but held her head high. Lyra whispered, "We'll tell Milo when he's older, about what Gale did." Ethan nodded. "We'll remember. Always." Above them, the stars stretched across the sky, silent witnesses to their flight. The danger was not over. The journey would not be easy. But they had been given a chance, and they would not waste it. The sun began to rise slowly over the Texas plains, casting long streaks of gold and crimson across the horizon. The night's weight still clung to Ethan's shoulders, but the first light of morning felt different now. Not like an ending, like a beginning. They had walked for hours after leaving the farm, moving cautiously but steadily westward. Mara carried Milo in her arms, the boy too exhausted to keep pace. Lyra walked beside Ethan, her small hand gripping his tightly. Despite the fatigue in her eyes, she remained alert, listening to the wind, the earth, the faint hum of distant movement. But the pursuit was behind them. For now. At the crest of a low ridge they stopped. Below, a dry riverbed curved between two rocky hills. On the far side stood a small, weather-beaten sign, barely legible. Sector 4. Gale's final promise. Ethan rested his hand against the signpost. The wood was cracked. Bullet holes scarred the metal frame, yet the place seemed untouched by recent violence. Mara stepped up beside him. "Do you think it's still safe?" Ethan studied the terrain carefully. "We'll find out." They descended into the riverbed cautiously. The rocks crunched beneath their boots. Birds stirred in the bushes. No signs of recent human activity. No scent of engine oil or gunpowder. Just earth and wind. Then Lyra paused, her head tilted. "There's something ahead." Not danger. Something calm. Ethan trusted her instincts now more than ever. They pressed forward, following a narrow path that wound between the hills. At the end of the trail, a hidden hollow opened up. A small valley sheltered by tall stone cliffs. Scattered among the trees were makeshift shelters, solar panels, and cultivated gardens. Green vines stretched across trellises. Crops grew in tidy rows, and people. Half a dozen men and women stood at the perimeter, watching silently. They wore simple clothes, patched and weathered. Some carried tools. A few held rifles, but none were raised. Mara instinctively moved in front of the children. One of the figures, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. Her eyes, gray, sharp, but kind, swept over the newcomers. "You've come from the east?" Ethan nodded cautiously. "Gale sent us." The woman's expression softened immediately. She lowered her weapon and motioned for the others to stand down. "Gale spoke of you. He said you might find your way here." Mara's breath caught. "You knew him?" "We all did." The woman's voice grew quiet. "He was one of the first to help us build this place. We owe him everything." A ripple of emotion passed through Mara. She gripped Milo and Lyra close, tears glistening in her violet eyes. The woman approached, her gaze warm but appraising. "You've traveled far. You're safe now. But this won't be the end of the road. The cleaners won't stop just because you've crossed into new territory." Ethan nodded. "We know. We'll help you prepare. Help you defend what's yours." It wasn't just a promise. It was an oath, one spoken by people who understood what it meant to lose everything and fight for a future anyway. As the sun rose higher, casting light over the small valley, the survivors gathered around. Some were fully human. Others bore the subtle marks of hybrid ancestry, eyes a little too bright, features a little too sharp. This was what Gale had hoped for. A community. A beginning. The next hours were a blur of introductions, planning, and quiet moments of rest. The children, though wary at first, began to relax as they played near the small stream that flowed at the edge of the settlement. Ethan and Mara sat beneath a tall cedar tree, watching them. "I never thought we'd find something like this," Mara whispered. "Neither did I," Ethan admitted, "but Gale believed we could." Mira's hand found his, fingers entwining. "We owe him more than we can ever repay. We repay him by surviving, by giving the kids a life worth living." She nodded, then glanced at Lyra and Milo. "They deserve more than running. More than hiding. They'll have it." Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. No matter what comes next, we face it together. No more running. No more isolation. We protect this place. We protect them. And we build something better. Mira's eyes shimmered. A family. Ethan smiled softly. A family. That evening, as the stars blinked into the darkening sky, the settlement gathered for a quiet meal. Bread baked in outdoor ovens, stewed vegetables from the gardens. It wasn't much, but it was shared with the solemn joy of survivors who had found one another. Afterward, Ethan stood at the edge of the valley, looking out toward the eastern plains. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere out there, the cleaners still hunted. They would come again, of that he had no doubt. But now, for the first time, he felt ready. A small hand slipped into his. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes watching the horizon. They'll come again, won't they? Yes, Ethan replied. Will we stop them? Ethan nodded. We will. Together. As the moon rose high and the stars stretched across the night, Ethan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. This was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of the fight for their future. As the stars glimmered overhead and the quiet valley promised a fragile future, one truth remained. This family's fight was far from over. Across the skies, dangers stirred. Allies waited in the shadows. And a war for the future of two worlds had only just begun. If you've walked this far with Ethan, Mira, and the children, stay with them. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Because their next chapter will change everything. Wherever you are, this is our fight now.